to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Friday, March 27, 2015. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. And we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. The news is very alarming. Now, the corporate media right now is focusing on Amanda Knox and on the German Wings crash because there are other things going on that they're kind of hoping you aren't really paying all that much attention to. And that has to do with the escalation toward war on multiple fronts. It just looks like the powers that are just going to ramp this war up for real. You know, we've been working toward this world war for 10 years. It's time we got this thing going, or something along those lines. And apparently the Obama administration is already sending weaponry into Ukraine, Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, 50 Abrams tanks, Humvees, various other things like that. Europeans are absolutely furious. They are now realizing that the U.S. is going to start a war with Russia on their territory, and they are not happy about it. Apparently, in some of the military drills that are already going on with NATO, U.S. A-10 tank buster aircraft were buzzing civilian areas in Poland and throwing everybody into a panic there. And Russia is saying, let's not spook the civilians just yet. Meanwhile, Poland is starting to bolster its regular armed forces with volunteer civilian militias, and apparently they're not being all that careful about who they're signing up. They're getting some ultra-right-wing extremists coming in as these paramilitaries that they're lining up for a potential war here. Now, the Pentagon is saying they will be sending U.S. troops into Ukraine next month. Their trainers and advisors, honest, they won't be in combat. When have you heard that one before? Now, meanwhile, in Kiev, Poroshenko's government had a chief anti-corruption official who apparently did his job a little too well after discovering that something like $300 million of the money that has been pouring into Kiev has vanished into the private pockets of the government officials. And because that was a little too high up, he's been fired. You know, you're not supposed to find corruption with us, just with the other people. You just don't understand how these things work here. Now, there's an interesting little story coming out of whatisyusa.info, and it's talking about Robert Parry, who is reporting that the CIA does in fact know what happened to Malaysian Airlines Flight 17, but is sitting on the information because, unfortunately, it directly contradicts the official U.S. story that the airliner was shot down by the pro-Russian militias. Apparently, the CIA found more evidence to the contrary, but they have to stay silent on that one. Now, as you know, the war in the Middle East is really ramping up in Yemen. It's making for some strange bedfellows here, and let's back up here and explain what's going on. There was a U.S. intervention in Yemen that kicked out the government and put in a pro-U.S. puppet, as the U.S. has been doing repeatedly since the end of World War II. The people of Yemen got sick and tired of their U.S. puppet and kicked him out, just like the Iranians did in 1979. And by golly, that cannot be allowed to stand. So all of the U.S. allies are piling on to Yemen. They're going to make a bloody example of that country to show the world that once you have an installed U.S. puppet, you will, by gosh, learn to love and obey him or her. And these Saudi airstrikes are not all against military targets. They hit a popular marketplace in Saada, killing civilians. And the killing of civilians, the targeting of civilian places like this market, show that the mission is there to punish the people of Yemen for rejecting foreign puppet rule by the United States. Now, that puppet ruler himself, he's already out of there. He's fled. He's gone. He's in exile, and yet he's still considered the internationally recognized leader of Yemen. Well, see, here's the dichotomy, because the leader of a country is supposed to be recognized by the people of that country, not by the international community making decisions on who's going to run other people's countries, which is where we are here right now. And that's what's going on. Because we have all these rulers of all these countries, and they're playing their little games of conquest. But apparently they're all willing to unite together against the idea of the people of a nation taking back control of their own nation, because that's a threat to all of them. Even the Israelis have come in, attacking Yemen. You have Israelis and the Arabs working together to crush down this popular rejection of an imposed leadership. Tells you what the agenda really is here. Saudi Arabia is basically bombing the entire country right now. They claim they're taking out the Houthis' air defense systems. And the Abdul Malik al-Houthi is basically saying the goal of this operation is to reconquer and occupy Yemen and reassert a U.S. puppet ruler. And speaking of puppets, the Houthi leader is out there saying, obviously Saudi Arabia is acting the role of a U.S. puppet. And everybody's just hopped on this thing. Right now we have Iran, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen are fighting against Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Egypt, and Pakistan. And now, as I just said, the Israelis are now joining with Saudi Arabia in the war on Yemen. Strange bedfellows indeed. We've always been at war with East Asia. Now, we're seeing all this propaganda all over the place, trying to somehow link what's going on in Yemen with Iran, to open the door for an attack there. And I'm looking at the story in the Daily Mail. Saudi Arabia sends warplanes into Yemen in a terrifying clash with Iran. Really? If it was a clash with Iran, wouldn't Saudi Arabia send their planes into Iran? But they're trying to make a link there to expand the war, to get the war with Iran that certain individuals, certain parties want and have not been able to get yet. Fox News, every time they talk about what's going on in Yemen, it's always prefaced Iranian-backed rebels, Iranian-backed Houthis, Iranian-backed librarians, Iranian-backed butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers. They're trying to create that link that this basically, this is all Iran's fault. No, this is the fault of the United States, which meddled in Yemen, replaced their government, declared it a foreign policy success, and now it's descended into chaos. And Washington, D.C. won't admit responsibility for what they've done. Oh, quick, we got to find somebody to blame. Who do we hate this week? Well, we hate Iran this week. All right, Iran's to blame. Iran's to blame for all of this. Now, up in Iraq, Muqtada Sadr is saying, Saudi Arabia, you should immediately halt attacks on Yemen and try and come to some kind of a peaceful resolution to this. The Saudis respond by pledging to continue the Yemen bombing campaign. Meanwhile, the IMF has now suspended their financial aid to Yemen, to the puppet ruler, amid Saudi airstrikes. And the Saudi Navy and the allies are warning all ships, not just Iran's, but all ships, do not approach the Yemen ports. In other words, they've imposed a blockade on Yemen. The only ships that are there, besides the Saudis, remember, we have 2 U.S. ships parked in the Red Sea, the Iwo Jima, and I forget the name of the other one. So all Israel needs to do right now is sneak one of their Dolphin submarines through the Suez Canal, which they have been caught doing, fire a shot at a U.S. ship, claim Iran did it, repeating the USS Liberty hoax, and the war with Iran will be underway, and Netanyahu will just be as happy as he could be with himself. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We got a caller waiting on the line, but before I take the call, a couple of stories we need to get through. Lone voice of sanity in the Middle East right now. Algeria will not join in with the Saudi invasion of Yemen. Their foreign minister, Ramtain Lamamra, is saying everybody should calm down and have a dialogue among all the factions in Yemen to resolve the crisis. Well, the U.S. doesn't want peace between the factions in Yemen. They want their U.S. puppet back in power. So Good for Algeria that they're sitting this one out. But this is really what it's all about, imposing U.S. hegemony on the world. All of these nations, they may fight amongst each other over various issues, but they are united against the idea of the people of a country running that country for themselves, because that is a threat to all their power and wealth. Surprise, surprise. After all this screaming about Iran's nuclear arsenal, Saudi Arabia says they will not rule out building nuclear weapons, apparently in response to the official U.S. acknowledgement that Israel is a nuclear-armed state. And it gets even more interesting because Saudi Arabia funded the majority of Pakistan's development of a nuclear weapon. And the implication is that if Saudi Arabia needs a bomb, they can buy one quickly from Pakistan. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. We're going to go to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Yeah, a lot of chess pieces moving back and forth and then back the other way, and it's just very mind-boggling, isn't it?
Yeah, we're working with Iran in Iraq. We're opposed to Iran in Yemen. It really doesn't make a lot of sense until you stop thinking about these wars in terms of national identities and start looking at it from pure economics. And again, the reason so many people are willing to whoop on Yemen right now is they want to make a bloody example to discourage the rest of the people of planet Earth from standing up and saying, we're going to run our own country from now on, because that idea is a threat to all of these governments. And they're trying to scotch that one as quickly as they can.
You can see there's different elements of power brokers at play in Yemen right now, because it's just, they're blaming the Iranians with the Houthi going in there, and they're making a deal with the Iranians, and then you got Saudi Arabia. It's not the Saudi Arabian people, it's the government. It's, a small group of...
Well, it's the new king. He wants to prove how butch he is.
Yeah, but 99% of the Saudi people are poor. They bring in foreigners at their factories. Why can't they hire their own people?
No, they haven't educated them enough. We got the same problem in this country. Common Core is putting out, degreed morons from our high schools, and that's why they have all these H-1B visas to bring in people from other countries to fill what few high-tech jobs we still have here, because our domestically educated kids aren't educated. They're indoctrinated. They're not educated, and that's not the same thing.
And Mike, I wanted to talk about that convoy going through Lithuania, Poland.
Yes.
It's funny, we say Russia is on the move to Sean Hannity, he's trying to expand his empire, and at the same time we're driving our convoys through all these countries.
Yeah, and they're all waving at the locals saying, "Hi, we're the good guys, we're the friends. Just be happy that we're here." And the Europeans most assuredly are not. They recognize that it's basically an armed military parade marching through their territory, and they are not at all happy at the prospect of a new major conflict on their front lawns, because they've already been through that twice.
Yeah, I think Poland's got a lot of tomatoes they can fling at the striker force there.
Yeah, they can, because of the food sanctions. The farmers have a lot of surplus of rotted crops right now.
Well, see, man, they should have gone with the Russians too. You got Hungary and also Greece with what's the island?
Cyprus.
Cyprus, that are going to be at the end of this month, I believe, right? That the sanctions are going to be. They're going to be lifted, the embargo. Yeah,
the food embargo is being lifted end of this month, which is basically just a few days away. And Russia is basically showing to the world that they're willing to treat their friendly countries very reasonably and even-handed. And it's quite a contrast with the European Central Bank and the European Commission, who are taking this hardline attitude of, we've got you in debt, you will pay that debt, you have no choice whatsoever. And Greece may actually hold a referendum about leaving the EU.
This just shows you how the American government and the UK and Brussels, NATO, it's all welfare and warfare state now. This is all we're left with.
Well, the welfare is to keep people dependent and obedient, and the warfare is to go on out there and drop our debts on somebody else's country, or destroy the countries that we owe money to. Same difference.
Oh, That's all we got, Mike, now. It's like you see China and Russia, they're doing deals, and all we see is us wherever we go. We're just causing chaos. Empire of chaos.
Well, war is big business. Anyway, Dustin, I'm going to let you go here right now. Thank you for the call. We're going to switch over to Jim in Kansas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
If I go to your website, whatreallyhappened.com, up in the upper left-hand corner, there's a place for, like, username and password. Am I supposed to put something in there? How can I listen to you other than I just get you an hour a day on the free-to-air satellite dish?
Well, you don't have to log into the website. There should be, during the actual show, in the right margin box, there's a little sign that says, listen now on the Genesis Communications Network. There's also a link on my website that goes to my own podcasts for one day after the broadcast. And, yeah, you can listen there, or GCNlive.com is playing it and also has podcasts. And
you start at what time?
We started about a half an hour ago, and we go for a total of 3 hours. So it's from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. Central U.S. time.
Okay, thanks a lot.
All right, thank you for the phone call. Okay, now then. Another non-governmental organization, Federation for Human Rights, has issued a report. Trapped and Punished, the Gaza Civilian Population Under Operation Protective Edge was published today by the International Federation for Human Rights, and once again confirms Israel was committing war crimes in Gaza. Period. End of discussion. And we all know it. We've seen the photos of the scarred and dead Palestinian children. Israel's still out there screaming, we had to bomb the schools and hospitals. That's where Hamas was hiding their weapons. And, of course, the United Nations has come out and said, no, we were in charge of those facilities. There were no weapons. I mean, take a look at how Netanyahu just lied going into his election. There will be no Palestinian state when I'm prime minister. And then as soon as he wins the election, turns around and says, oh, of course I'm in favor of the two-state solution. This man lies left and right. So why would you take anything the government of Israel says at face value? Anyway. Meanwhile, Harvey Weinstein is urging Jews to take on anti-Semites organized like the mafia. Kick these guys in the rear end. Sounds like a call to violence to me, and that's a violation of the USA Patriot Act. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, speaking about Iran, we are hearing indications of potential progress on the P5+1 deal, which is supposed to be finalized in a couple of days. Iran is sending messages that they can accept a 10-year limit on their nuclear technology, because the reality is they're not trying to build a bomb, and so they were planning on doing what they're doing for 10 years anyway, without embellishment. So it's no loss for them. But they're saying, yeah, they'll accept that 10-year timetable that Netanyahu's been screaming about. And one of the concessions that Obama is making is to allow Iran to retain its centrifuges in the underground bunker at Natanz. Now, of course, everybody's screaming, that was Iran's secret facility and we exposed it. No, they didn't. The history of this is, Iran called up the IAEA and said, we are going to build an underground centrifuge plant so that Israel cannot bomb us. Please come take a look at the blueprints. And feel free to stop by and look at what we're doing. And the Western media tried to make it look like Iran had been caught hiding an underground centrifuge plant. So now we're hearing that the Obama administration is okay with Iran keeping their centrifuge plant in a place where it can't be bombed by Israel and shower the Middle East with radiation, as long as Iran will agree to, inspections and other safeguards at that facility to make sure they're not making something they should not be. And Iran said, sure, fine. So it's moving right along. But of course, for those Israeli whores in the U.S. government, that's simply not acceptable. And I'm looking at this article that came out of Investment Watch blog, where Obama is being denounced. He's gone too far. Obama is going to take the Iran deal to the United Nations and bypass the Congress, and he can't do that. Well, actually, the P5+1 deal has always been in the United Nations. The P in P5 are the permanent members of the Security Council. This has always been their deal. The United States is merely one participant in the P5. And if the UN Security Council says this is a deal and we agree to it, the United States, under their membership with the United Nations, is obligated to comply, and the Congress doesn't get to veto that. Although we've got the congressional leadership saying, we won't send any more checks to the United Nations. We'll box up the UN building and send it to Paris, and the rest of it. John Bolton's been making the rounds all over the place saying, we can't talk with the Iranians. They're completely untrustworthy. This, of course, coming from one of the people who was telling us that Saddam had nuclear weapons. And he's out there just saying, we've got to attack. We've got to immediately attack Iran. And he's frothing at the mouth. Okay, John, if you really feel that way about it, here's your rifle, here's your parachute. We ran out of the desert camo, but here's a bright day-glow fluorescent orange jumpsuit left over from the CIA's torture centers. Watch your head climbing into that transport plane, and we'll call Tehran and tell them you are on your way to kick their butts all by yourself. But after all the lies used by the U.S. government, including you personally, to trick us into aggressive wars, which are the ultimate war crime, you will understand if we the people sit this next one out and keep our children safe at home. So, John, have fun. Let's see how truly committed to war you are. You go yourself. Because it's really easy to be splendidly brave and courageous when it's other people's children on the line. I think we ought to take up all these people in the U.S. Congress who love Israel so much that they're willing to sell your sons and daughters as mercenaries for a war on Iran. Let's take them all up, put them in a big C-5 transport plane, drop them off at the nearest airport outside Tehran, tell Tehran we're bringing them. Here they are. These are the people who wanted to make war on you. They're now on your territory. Do what you want with them. I really do think that's what we need to be doing. And Jeb Bush is out there on the war wagon. He's out there, how dare Obama disparage Netanyahu, and how dare he negotiate with a country that supports the Holocaust. Never have I seen a candidate with tongue so handy and information so uncertain, and we have seen so many of those throughout time. I think America deserves better for a president. And I would hope Americans are tired of politicians so fanatically devoted to Israel that they ignore the problems we have right here at home. And as far as I'm concerned, Jeb Bush has just shown himself to be another Israel whore seeking the highest office in the United States of America. And we have had far too many members of Congress and far too many presidents who view Israel as their top priority instead of the American people. What's going on here is they're actually holding an Israel butt-kissing contest. See which one of them can do that big sloppy smooch on Netanyahu's derriere and get the biggest amount of AIPAC campaign cash. But I think by the time the 2016 elections are really ramping up, friend of Israel is going to be seen as a negative by the majority of the voters. I would certainly hope. Now, if you were watching Fox News, you would think that Amanda Knox and German wings were the top stories, because they don't want you thinking about how they're trying to basically sneak World War III in on you before you notice. And at this point, there is so much spin going on this German wings story, it's almost not worth paying attention to anymore. Earlier today, there was a report that this co-pilot was being treated for depression. Now that's been denied. The Dusseldorf University Hospital is saying that, yes, Andreas Lubitz was in their facility for treatment of an illness, but they won't say what it is. But they made a point of coming out and saying it wasn't depression, it wasn't depression, it wasn't depression, because we can't have anybody questioning if antidepressants cause violent episodes. And the spin continues out there. We've been hearing stories that say it was the short circuit in CERN's magnet brought it down. It was a test of a new U.S. Air Force laser weapon. Pat Robertson is out there saying this guy may have been a closet Muslim. Rush Limbaugh was trying that one yesterday. And there's even one newspaper, and I stress only one, in Germany that's saying, yes, he did it for Allah. Because we all know the corporate media have got to protect the airline, got to protect Airbus, got to protect the pharmaceutical industry, and as long as we're lying through our teeth about it, let's support the terror propaganda against Muslims. And by the way, there's a huge amount of anti-Muslim propaganda going up on buses in this country again. Can't put up anything critical of Israel. Oh, that's hate speech. You know, we've turned into France here. Freedom of speech means you can bash the Muslims, but not say anything about Israel. And that's not freedom of speech. That's permitted speech. And right now, the streets of the United States are starting to look very much like Nazi Germany with all the propaganda they were putting up against the Jews. It's the same recycled propaganda. They just switched the targeted population. Now, there's a very interesting story over at Blacklisted News. And it's talking about this anti-Iranian group, United Against Nuclear Iran. And apparently they were caught in a little bit of skullduggery, but they just got a get-out-of-jail-free card from the United States courts because the Department of Justice said any kind of a prosecution of these people would reveal state secrets. And the judge agreed and just threw the case out of court. A lot of underhanded stuff going on, trying to get us into World War III. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're just going to go ahead and go back to the phones here. John in Barbados. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Just to scotch all the nonsense that's being pushed out about this German wings flight, I downloaded the cockpit door operating manual. There is no reason whatsoever why the captain of that aircraft did not go into the cockpit. None.
Unless the system malfunctioned.
The only reason is unless that system was crashed. But even then, these doors aren't that strong. He's right next to a galley, and ramming a galley trolley into that door would have busted it down.
Well, they're saying now that he was using an axe on the door, because apparently an axe is part of the safety equipment they have on board the plane there. At this point, everybody is massaging this story for their own personal agenda, and at this point, you know, we're not getting the straight dope. We know that. It's a distraction. I really want to put the focus back on the wars, plural, and the economy.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I read this story about America only having 4 years since its inception in 1776, 4 years without war. Well, I think that's a lie. There's never been a year without a war that America hasn't been participating in, or its proxies. So, you know, what is it with the American culture that they're always at war?
Well, now, wait a minute. It's hardly unique to the American culture. I mean, look at the history of Europe before America even came along. They were always at war with each other. The Spanish Armada, you know, Britannia rules the waves and all the rest of that. The sun never sets on the British Empire. You know, anytime you get too much money and power underneath one ruler, the first thing they want to do is start knocking down the borders of the neighboring country.
Well, I want to compare that, Mike, to Iran, who's gone more than 200 years, probably close on 250, without having any wars of aggression at all.
Now let's clarify that, okay? Iran has been hit with wars, like the Iran-Iraq war, but that was started from outside. It is more correct to say that Iran has not initiated a war of aggression with another country in over 200 years. I think it's 230. And that's an important point to make, because all of these wars we're seeing from Israel and the United States right now are wars of aggression, which, coming out of the Nuremberg trials, is the ultimate war crime. When you just start a war just because you want to start a war and you lie your own people into these wars of aggressions. In my opinion, any government that lies to its people to trick them into a war of aggression, that is the highest of high crimes and misdemeanors that a government can commit, and justifies removal of that government by the people.
It's all, yeah, but you're quite correct. It's all funded and urged and planned by the money junkies, the central banks, the private individuals who are in control, really, of the world.
Well, they're in control of the world because politicians are willing to sell their own mother for $1. And that's also been a truism. The curse of political power is that it attracts the very people who should not be allowed to have it. The founding fathers of this country recognized that, and they set up a governmental system so that authority was not concentrated in too few hands. Power and authority was diffused across the entire society, down to the states, down to the counties and the cities, and the central federal government was very limited. Its role was, in the event of war, to organize a national defense, and other than that, arbitrate between the states, and basically mind its own business after that. Unfortunately, Washington, D.C. has completely gone away from the Constitution, which I think means it's an illegitimate and illegal government.
Well, the Constitution probably was, the American Constitution was probably one of the most important documents ever produced. However, the lack of due diligence seems to have subverted that Constitution, and now it's unfortunately, like George Bush said, just a goddamn bit of paper.
Not to me it isn't. Not to me it isn't. I'm a strict constitutionalist, and the authority of the federal government is founded on that Constitution. If they're not abiding by the Constitution, they're not a legal, legitimate government. Anyway, John, we're coming up on the top of the hour. I need to let you go. I want to fit in one more phone call before we take the news break, so thank you. We're going to switch over to Al in Canada. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
It is a good one today. I read the article from the Star about the Bank of Canada lawsuit. It's finally out there.
Yes.
As soon as I saw it, I ran over to my MP's office, and I asked the lady if she had seen it. She said yes, because, I reported this to my MP, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, and, it's what John in Barbados was saying. I mean, the central bankers, this has got to end. Money is the root of all evil, especially when these rich folk think it's theirs, and they can control our lives with it. It's got to end.
I absolutely agree. It's an inherently unstable system. It always leads to crushing debt, poverty, and war. And there's a better way to run a national, or for that matter, even a global economy. Again, we're dealing with people who are addicted to wealth. It doesn't matter how much they have, they got to have more, and they don't care who they take it away from. And these are absolutely the last people we should have running the economic system of a country. And there's another lesson here in this article. I was going to talk about it in the next hour, but I'll mention it here. The government of Canada tried to suppress this story. They were blocking links to the articles we had at whatreallyhappened.com. They had literally ordered Canadian media to suppress the story, and they couldn't keep it out. People in Canada were still finding out about what's going on, so now they're going to have to say, all right, we got to let the media report it, or it just makes it even more obvious that we're trying to keep this thing under wraps. So I'm glad that the Canadian media is finally covering this story. It is an important story. And, the Canadians are dealing with the same situation we're dealing with here in the United States of America. The system was originally set up to serve the people and the nation, and it got hijacked to serve the private bankers, and everybody wants to know why. And the only excuse the government has is, well, they write bigger campaign donation checks than the people do.
Yeah, and I also, to begin with, these people didn't have this money to start with. They stole it from us. It's been stolen through the fruit of our labor. To think that a citizen of any country on the face of this planet has to actually pay to use their own currency to exchange goods between each other. It's ludicrous.
Of course it's ludicrous. That's why when the United States was started, we had an interest-free currency, a public currency handled as a public utility. And the private central bankers can't stand that. Their idea is the entire world in debt to them forever. Yeah,
it's going to end. Like it said in that article, the genie's out of the bottle. You can't put it back in. Mike, I've been listening to you for 6-7 years now. Mm-hmm. You're doing a great job. Keep it up.
Oh, thank you. I will just as long as I can here. And we're going to let you go. Thank you for the call. And we're going to grab this last call real quick before the news break. I don't have your name. Who are you, and what is on your mind?
Can you hear me, Mike?
I can hear you.
Okay, nobody even answers to you. It went right directly to you.
Yeah, I just grabbed.
I live. My name is Damien. I'm in New York. Just to let you know, a lot of my clients, a lot of people I deal with, they're all in finance. They're Wall Street. They're working for various banks. There's a lot of reports that, a lot of instances that don't go reported where there are a lot of people in the finance industry that are jumping out of buildings and stuff. I mean, I can honestly tell you that in the 3 months prior to, so let's say November, December, January, I know personally of between 10 and 12 instances where people would just decide to go up to the roof on their lunch break, take a nosedive off a building because they're so leveraged. They get to the point where they see really no way for their families, their children to have the life that they want them to have, and they go cash in on their X amount of $1 million policies, and they just decide to take a nosedive off the roof of the building. So I can tell you honestly, you make a joke about it, but it's actually happening quite often. They're not being reported.
There are also some of these deaths appear to be attempts by higher-ups to break chains of evidence between low-level skullduggery and the managers who caused it. Most insurance policies don't pay for a suicide, and it's the opposite over in Japan. But here in the U.S., most insurance policies don't pay or pay very, very little for suicide.
Actually, look that up, Mike, because actually a lot of it, of course, the ones that they're getting, they are paying out. So check that out. Because that is something that is actually happening. I know.
All right. Well, thank you for the information. We got to let you go here right now. We got to take a break for news, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645. Tom is still in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, we're going to talk about the economy for a little bit here, and I want to start off with a story that we found over at the Daily Bell. And they're talking about this article that came out in the New York Post basically saying, look, it's time we admit it. The stock market is being rigged because it's completely disconnected from the economic realities of the nation. And everybody knows it. We might as well admit it. And the stock market rigging has basically hit the corporate media. And this is from John Crudell, who has done a lot of financial expose over the years. Now, we did get our traditional Friday happy ending on the stock market, but only just barely. But it is being rigged. I mean, we've had LIBOR, we've had gold and silver price fixing, we've had all of this stuff going on. And that leads to a very interesting question coming out of Investment Watch blog. Can Wall Street even exist without looting its customers' accounts? Is the profit model based on corruption? And it would seem like in a nation that has lost much of its manufacturing and almost all of its agricultural exports, that Wall Street has basically gone into fraud as what they're all about. And there was a magazine interview done on Wall Street a little over a year ago, where 25% of the people interviewed said, yes, they engage in fraud. It's encouraged by management. If they don't engage in fraud, they can lose their job. If they all weren't engaging in fraud, their companies would go out of business. And it's one of those moral rationalizations. Well, we got to do this now to stay in business. We'll make up for it later, and later never arrives. And they cross over the line, and fraud becomes the norm. It's justified by, we've got to maintain trust and faith in the American banking system, even as they're destroying it bit by bit. I keep thinking back to that wonderful documentary, Inside Job, won the Academy Award, and then kind of sort of faded away. And HBO cranked up their own made-for-the-purpose movie, Too Big to Fail, which portrayed all of the Wall Street leaders of the 2008 collapse of the mortgage-backed security fraud as heroic figures caught by bad luck and struggling to make the best out of a bad situation, which, of course, is complete nonsense. They were crooks. They got caught. Their fraud collapsed, and in true fascist economic dictatorship style, the losses got transferred onto you, the taxpayer. Now, as that caller mentioned, we are finally seeing in the corporate media in Canada mentions of this Comer lawsuit. And there was this article up in the Star, and interestingly enough, they lead with this thing about the court challenge, and then they go in with a smear on the original litigant about how he was involved with Trotsky and he was down in Mexico, and they're trying to make him look like he's a bad guy before they finally get down to the meat of the whole article, which is the charter for the Bank of Canada. Says that the Bank of Canada has to provide interest-free loans to Canadian government for infrastructure development. And back in the 1970s, apparently in some kind of a deal with Basel, the Bureau of International Settlements, the Canadian government started borrowing infrastructure development funds from private banks at interest and dumped those interest payments on the Canadian taxpayer. And they didn't really have any reason to do it. And we have the same situation going on here in the United States of America. Already they're out there screaming about, should we raise the debt ceiling? Should we cut spending? That's a false dichotomy. The real question is, why, when the Constitution authorizes the federal government to create and issue and manage a debt-free currency, does our government continue to borrow currency at interest from a privately owned central bank, shackling future generations of Americans to unpayable debt? And the answer is, well, those private central bankers are writing fatter campaign donation checks than the American people are. So, of course, we're going to sell you out to them. That's how politics works. And they don't want you thinking about that. The Canadian government did try and suppress this story. And it didn't work because the independent media kept it alive, kept it before the Canadian people, and now they're grudgingly having to say, well, yeah, there's this lawsuit, and we'll figure out some way to get out of this whole mess, but we've got to talk about it because everybody knows we're sitting on it. All righty, let's see. We're going to take a phone call here. Peter in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Michael. A couple calls ago, John from Barbados called in, and for the most part, I think he's very valuable what he contributes there. But I took a little bit of offense at saying basically that the United States is the root of all evil, and when of course Britain has had a couple hundred years more of us, of imperial domination and endless wars, and the fact that what's sick with our society was a virus injected from Britain, which is the whole Rothschild central banking thing. And what's really wrong, what infected Britain, what infected us, is the whole usurious banking mentality. That doesn't have to be that way. There are banks that aren't usurious, but that has dominated Western civilization, and really since the advent, at least of the Rothschilds.
Well, let me back up here just a little bit because I want to draw a big black line between the idea of a normal depositor bank in your town, which takes in savings deposits, pools it together, loans it out for project development, charges interest, and shares that interest with the depositors. That's a useful system to have. The problem with the private central bank is the entire nation's currency is the proceed of a loan at interest. And by design, the debt always exceeds the available money supply, and there's no turning it around. That is a system designed to enslave a nation. And what really triggered the American Revolution was King George III's Currency Act, which ordered the colonies to abandon their own domestically produced currencies, which were working for them, and conduct all business only using banknotes borrowed at interest from the Bank of England. And it took only a couple of years for this practice to drain the wealth out of the American colonies and put it in the pockets of the bankers. And that was really what was the primary cause of the American Revolution. They don't teach that in our grade schools. They haven't taught it in 100 years because the smart kids are going to stand up and say, wait a minute, we're back under that same system again, courtesy of the Congress and President Woodrow Wilson back in 1913. So it has succeeded to this point because most people didn't understand what was going on. You know, we all grew up with film strips in the classroom saying, oh, the Federal Reserve, you know, it's managing our money, it's part of the government, and it isn't. It's no more federal than Federal Express. And it is a predatory system, and it has lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years because politicians can be bought. Every politician in office in every single government in every single country has a dollar sign floating above their head. Some are bigger than others. And that's why this money junkie power perpetuates. But at some point, you know, we're going to start seeing more and more countries breaking out of this system and taking control of their national currency to run the public currency as a public utility. And the bankers hate that. And these people are so insanely rich. I mean, they're rich enough to be kept off the Forbes list of the richest people in the world because they don't even want you to know that they're there and how much wealth they have made off their little ink and paper scam. And if you want to have a bit of an eye-opener, go to Google and type in Rothschild Homes images and take a look at the palaces these people are living in, all because of ink and paper manipulation. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, Peter, and we'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Fox News is still going on and on about the Germanwings crash and the co-pilot's mental illness, but he was not being treated for depression. And it almost feels like they're using that to conditize us because they don't want to talk about the U.S. sending Abrams tanks to Kiev or the bombing of Yemen by everybody in the area, including Israel. They don't want to talk about that. That would just trouble your poor little... We'll give you the plane crash and the blown-up building and Amanda Knox and the rest of that. Now, I want to reference one of the commercials you just heard on this last break for Midas Investments, because if you have not yet started acquiring physical silver and physical gold, you're already late out of the gate, and you need to start. Because Wall Street is not going to be able to keep up this illusion that the dollar has value much longer. At some point, something will give. Look at the history of every other major economic crash in this country. It's always preceded by all kinds of machinations to make it look like everything was good and the employment rate was wonderful and the dollar is strong and the stock market is looking great. And all of these machinations did was make the eventual resulting crash that much more damaging. We're in the same cycle right now. So I strongly, strongly urge you to get physical silver and gold, not paper. That stuff is leveraged 100 to 1 right now. Get your hands on the physical metal. Keep it in your home. Don't tell anybody it's there, so people don't come knocking on your door and asking to see it. But you got to have some. Because when that paper dollar evaporates, it's going to happen very, very quickly indeed. So that's Midas again, 800-686-2237. Speaking of gold, the Dutch have now requested repatriation of 122.5 tons of their gold from the United States Federal Reserve. Good luck getting it. It's almost eerie. I did that America's Book of Secrets, their last season, and that one episode especially, the gold conspiracy. And when it came out and people said, oh, come on, that's ridiculous, that's silly. These kinds of things don't happen. These are trusted names on Wall Street. Well, now we know they can't be trusted. I got an email chastising me saying that there was the Canadian caller saying that money is the root of all evil and wishes to correct it to say it's the lust for money that is the root of all evil. And I have to agree. Money junkieism is the problem. Not everybody who's rich is a money junkie. And I want to remind everybody that I don't have a problem with people who are rich. I wouldn't mind being rich myself, to be very honest. But there are good ways to get rich. And I use as the example people like Steve Jobs or James Cameron especially, who make a product or a movie or an entertainment we want to see and voluntarily trade our money for. And they got rich. And that is how capitalism is supposed to work. And Avatar is still my favorite movie of all time. And I greatly admire what Jim Cameron has done with his money. With all the deep sea exploration, it's just amazing stuff. This is a guy that it's hard not to admire. And I'm not even going to try not to admire him. I mean, I do admire him, obviously. And that's the right way to do it. And I know they like having money, and they enjoy their money, but it's not the end-all and be-all of what they're doing. And again, James Cameron proves it. He's got the money. He's not just sitting on it and trying to make it grow. He's going on out. He's funding research. He's doing good with it, which is what money is capable of doing in the right hands. It's people who are addicted to money in and of itself, who are taking vast sums of wealth out of society and returning nothing of value for it. That's the problem. It's an addiction, just like cocaine addiction or meth addiction or heroin addiction. And they don't see the damage their addiction causes to those around them. And unfortunately, because it is money, we don't always recognize that this particular addiction is as destructive, even more destructive than the others. We're not supposed to see it that way. We're supposed to look up and admire people like Bernie Madoff, who had all that money that he stole, till he got caught here. Now, there's a bit of an argument brewing between the United States and China, especially between the World Trade Organization and this new China Investment Bank, because China is refusing to use U.S. banking technology in light of the revelations coming out of Edward Snowden about how anything to do with computers and business in the United States is backdoored and being spied on. And we know that the U.S. government engages in industrial espionage for its own profitability. And China doesn't want to have anything to do with that. And the U.S. government is taking the position, no, you will use our systems. You will use our systems, and we're only spying on you to keep an eye on terrorists. And China wants their own systems that they know are not backdoored. They want to use their own strong encryption because they want to keep their business secrets private, and they are perfectly right to do that, just as you are perfectly right to want to keep your business secrets away from a government with a track record of stealing business secrets for their own personal profit. Now, over in Europe, Germany is complaining that they still haven't received any kind of a plan from Greece as to how Greece is going to repay all this ginned-up debt. Greece's 3-year yield has jumped. Greece is running out of money. They're probably going to be they're going to be in a cash crisis next month. Bank deposits are down. There's a slow-motion bank run going on place. And there is growing word that Greece may hold a referendum on their membership in the European Union. And right now, the sentiment among the people of Greece is better off on their own, going back to the drachma, and not let their economy be plundered and pillaged by the money junkies up at the European Central Bank. Here in the United States of America, combined U.S. business and personal debt is now reaching $60 trillion. And that is unsustainable, especially with all the high-paying jobs having been offshored. And the Republicans out there screaming, we don't need an increase in the minimum wage here. And at some point, the illusion's going to break, and that's when you're going to see gold go through $3,000 an ounce. Meanwhile, a study conducted over in Great Britain is showing that 1 out of every 20 students in Great Britain has to work in the sex trade to make ends meet. 1 out of 20. High cost of education. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're going to go right to the phones here and grab a phone call. James in South Carolina. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Michael, I was listening to Paul Craig Roberts the other day.
Yes.
He just made the statement about the economy. He says the economy is a house of cards, yet it still stands. It's been seeming like to me it's been standing a long time. Could there be mechanisms that powerful people have that the general public doesn't know about? I mean, like the first time somebody stopped bartering in wanted to trade gold for a chicken or something, it was probably an unusual thing. The first time somebody wanted to use a credit card, it was an unusual thing. Could there be things in the wings that these people are using?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was the whole point of that story that was out there earlier, where they're saying, yeah, fraud is rampant on Wall Street. It is how they are surviving. And rich people always have little things that allow them to become richer that you're not supposed to know about, like tax shelters and various other little special things that are for the rich people only. But the difference is today, in the age of the Internet and the independent media, ordinary people are now finding out just how rigged the whole system is in favor of people who already have lots of money to enable them to take even more away from you, the poor, struggling, working class people.
I was thinking about the United States has tremendous areas of land, and I would be very stunned if there are not gold mines and silver mines and all kind of other mines on those places. Could they not be doing something with rights to these things?
Well, that's a very complex issue. First of all, mining is either workable or not based on what's called the unit cost of extraction. In other words, by the time they're through mining and refining and sorting everything out, they still have to show a profit. When gold and silver prices are being kept artificially low, the mines have to shut down because they're spending more money to get the gold out of the ground than they can sell that gold for. When gold takes off, the mines will reopen again, and there'll be new mining technologies developed for that. Now, the issue of the land, though, is very complicated because under the enclave clause of the Constitution, the federal government is only allowed to own and manage land that's underneath their own federal buildings or other needed facilities like military bases, harbors, and so forth. They don't actually have the legal right to go on out and grab huge tracts of land and wall it off from the American people. But they've been doing it ever since Nixon ended gold convertibility under the guise of the EPA to grab that land to pledge as collateral on more government borrowing. And it would surprise you just how much of America's public lands, which is supposed to be our collective property, are now basically the collateral on government debts. And when our economy and our government collapses, you're going to see a lot of foreigners come on in and say, I've got the lien on Yellowstone National Park or the Grand Canyon or Sequoia or all these other roadless areas or wilderness zones and so forth and all the mineral rights there too. And we're going to have to be ready to stand up and say, look, you didn't do your due diligence. It wasn't legal for the federal government to use our public lands as collateral for their borrowing. Take your piece of paper and get on out of here. Just like the Greek people are getting ready to say, look, that debt that was run up between Goldman Sachs and Papandreou was done through fraud and criminal activity. We're not liable. Ultimately, the people are going to have to stand up to the money junkies and say, look, that's not a legitimate debt. And there is a recognized principle in international law called odious debt, where debts incurred by a government for purposes other than care of the nation and its people are not the responsibility of the people to repay when that government collapses. Money borrowed for war is considered odious debt. Money borrowed to give to other countries is odious debt. Money borrowed to build surveillance systems across us all, that's odious debt. We, the people, are morally and legally liable for money borrowed to build schools, roads, hospitals, rails, power stations, water distribution, things like that. But we're not on the hook legally for the rest.
Can that be found?
Yeah, just web search the phrase odious debt.
No, I don't mean odious debt. I'm sorry. I mean, can it be shown empirically that we owe, say, France, China, Russia, somebody, a piece of land somewhere in the 48 contiguous states or Alaska, Hawaii?
It's not publicly documented very well. There are a couple of isolated incidents because, again, the federal government realized that the American people, it's one of those things you're not supposed to know about. Because, again, it's our public lands. It's not the property of the federal government to do with as they as they will. And that's the reason the enclave clause was put in the Constitution by the Founding Fathers, because they knew from Europe's history that when governments got into economic trouble, they would just go on out, grab the land of the people, say it's now ours, and we will sell it or lease it or rent it or do whatever we want with it. And they didn't want the federal government to have that kind of power in the United States. Unfortunately, our current government really isn't playing by the rules anymore. As far as how much we owe to other countries, I know that's available with a web search. I don't have that information handy to me right now. But I'll give you one example that we're familiar with, and that was when Clinton declared the Grand Staircase Escalante Monument out of Utah, which happened to include vast low-sulfur coal reserves, which are now illegal for U.S. to exploit. And that reserve is being held as collateral for, I think it's Indonesia, someplace like that. And by doing that, by the way, the federal government broke Utah's statehood agreement, which explicitly says these coal reserves are to fund Utah's public school system. And Clinton took it away and said, look, we'll give you federal funds for Utah's school system, and along with it, federal controls about what you can teach your people. Okay?
Okay. Keep it up, Michael.
I'll do my best here. Thank you for the call. We're going to switch over to Richard in Canada. Aloha, Richard. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, it's Richard from Ottawa there. I've been meaning to phone you for a long time. You're talking about the economy in Canada and how it's been run. In the 70s, I believe it was Pierre-Elliott Trudeau that was in charge of the government then.
Yes.
And there was a lot of corruption going on there at that time. I remember when I was young, my father was giving corn because he had 7 kids to vote for him. But the thing is the sad thing people don't know is the next in command is his son, Justin Trudeau, who's going to be prime minister there the next time. And also I have a friend also that I took a computer course a few years ago, and he worked 44 years for the Parliament of Canada. And he had to take a course because he injured himself and he couldn't retire. But he says the Canadian government is run 90% by pedophiles that control the government. And they have rooms in the Parliament.
They should join the club.
What?
They should join the club. I mean, Great Britain.
Yeah, but the sad thing is that's why you wonder how come because I remember you mentioned before about England, they had a lot of corruption there, BBC and all that, about pedophiles. Well, in Canada, that's what's been running government. That's what's been running the country. It's sad. That's why the country's going downhill all the way.
We had the same thing here in the United States back in the 80s with the Franklin scandal. And you have to wonder, is it just these people who seek high office are that mentally ill that they find little children sexually attractive? Or is maybe buggering a small child and letting them take pictures of it the price tag to enter the higher levels of political power, because then you're controllable and blackmailable and dependable? I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but it does seem to be ubiquitous.
Yeah, this guy worked 44 years there, and he saw so many guys were invited to cottage, young kids that went there. He started there at 14 years old, and it was illegal for him, but because his parents worked at the government, they let him in there. And I had a funny question to ask you, Mike. Don't take offense there.
Well, actually, I'm going to have to ask you to wait through the commercial break, and we'll come right back to you with your question after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go right back to Richard. You had a question you wanted to ask me.
Yeah, just a funny question there. I was going to ask because a lot of people are wondering because I've been listening to you for a while. Does Dustin have a red phone? He seems like always to be the first caller. It's just funny.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that again? I didn't hear you clearly.
Dustin phones you a lot, and he's always the first caller.
Yeah, well, he tends to be early, and, John in Barbados is a regular caller.
Maybe he had a red phone or something. It was just a joke. But anyways, Mike, keep the good work.
Thank you.
And I'll phone you again.
All right. Look forward to it. Look forward to it. Okay. Thank you very much for the phone call. All righty. Now then, speaking of China's concerns over American computer technology, the news continues to get worse and worse and worse. And there's an article over at RINF.com, Facebook and the Military-Industrial Surveillance Complex. And apparently it concerns the European Commission's attorney, Bernard Schima, told the Court of Justice of the European Union that the U.S.-EU Safe Harbor Framework that's supposed to protect the privacy of law-abiding citizens does not work. In fact, it was discovered NSA and its British counterpart GCHQ were siphoning off data transfers by tapping directly into undersea cable networks. And now we begin to understand why so many of these undersea cables are failing, because they're botching up the taps. And so they made a big deal about the safe harbor framework. We're going to protect the private data of law-abiding citizens. And NSA and GCHQ said, no, you're not. We're going to tap into the cables. And basically another article on the same topic from Global Research up in Canada is saying that a lawyer representing the Austrian government before the CGEU says that this whole safe harbor framework is better suited to pirates than the protection of the data of EU citizens. It's up there to make everybody think their data is secure, while the system was designed to be hijacked by NSA and GCHQ. Now, here's a story out of naturalnews.com. U.S. government allows itself to copy all your old emails. And apparently this is a report in McClatchy newspapers. The federal government has now granted itself the authority, somehow, to read all of your emails that are older than 6 months without needing a court-issued warrant. And so, you know all that junk email, spam email you have in your trash that's loaded with malware and stuff? Leave it. Leave it there. Let them siphon that off and deal with all those issues here. That might motivate them to go after the cyber criminals and the hackers a little bit here. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, we're seeing this double standard emerge in France and even here in the United States of America, where attacking Muslims is considered an expression of freedom of speech, but questioning Israel's policies in Palestine is hate speech and to be banned. Now, freedom of speech is a universal. If it isn't, then it's just permitted speech. It's not freedom of speech. And apparently over in Philadelphia, the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority is running an ad on their bus, and apparently they went to court saying these are offensive, because the ads are basically out there saying that, you know, hate and hostility by the Muslims is written in the Quran. They have a picture of Hitler sitting with the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, and they're basically out there trying to equate Islam with the Nazis, which is ridiculous because this nation is acting much more like the Nazis than the Muslims do. But that's the propaganda they're putting out. And if you have ever studied the history of the propaganda that was being put out by the Nazis in the run-up to World War II, their propaganda against the Jews, it's virtually identical. You just take out Jew, put in Muslim, it's the same stuff all over again. And we now live in this bizarro world where freedom of speech means you can say bad things, lies, fraud about the Muslims, but you can't even tell the truth about Israel without being thrown in jail. Now, we've been talking about the F-35, what a boondoggle it is. We're talking about the latest revelation that their sensor fusion system that is supposed to take the sensor output from a whole squadron of F-35s and present each individual pilot with a tactical display doesn't work. Multiple bogeys, same bogey shown multiple times. It's junk. It doesn't work. Well, this kind of military boondoggle is not confined to the United States of America, because apparently RAF pilots are now banned from flying the Lightning II fighter jets in storms. Apparently, if it gets hit by lightning, it will explode. So, thunderstorms are now your friend. We're going to attack the government building. Oh, let's wait for a thunderstorm. They can't bring their warplanes in. All right. Speaking of attacking the government and the government attacking back, a lot of people are getting very concerned about this Operation Jade Helm, which is this massive 10-state military exercise that seems to be all about the government capturing state capitals that are refusing to do what they're told and targeting dissidents. And one of the stories we're looking at here, coming out of D.C. Clothesline, is a key component of this Jade Helm military exercise will involve soldiers trying to operate undetected among the civilian population to see if they can infiltrate without being noticed. What law enforcement anti-terror goal does this serve? To train American soldiers to infiltrate American cities and not be noticed, I wonder. Trying to get close to the dissidents so they can do the extractions, and they're practicing that too, extraction of dissidents. Maybe it's time we all go back to the hairstyles of the 1960s, long hair, big facial beards and everything, so those military buzz cuts stand out. Might be a good thing to do there. All righty. Let's see. Another article on the same topic. This is in Blacklisted News. Fears of martial law as special ops set to swarm Southwest and operate undetected among civilians who've been deemed hostile in massive military exercise. And hostile, of course, means anybody who's in love with or shares the truth. Because when you live under a government that lies to you about everything, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. And this government doesn't want to give up lying because it makes governing you that much easier. Saddam has nuclear weapons, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, and you obediently march off to wars of conquest. And they don't want to give that up. So anybody out there pointing out where the official story's got flaws or is an outright lie, they're now an enemy of the state. And everyone's very concerned about this Jade Helm because it very clearly is an exercise to train American troops to round up dissidents, shut down the independent media, to infiltrate the population of cities, to be amongst us for covert, nefarious purposes. There is no legitimate law enforcement or anti-terror goal for these kinds of exercises. These are about the U.S. federal government having to invade and conquer the American states because we're fed up with their nonsense here. Now, speaking of truthers, there's a major victory for architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. The American Institute of Architects has greenlit a resolution supporting a new investigation, objectively third-party, non-governmental, into just exactly how World Trade Center Building 7 came down into its own footprint. 22 minutes after the BBC said it had already collapsed. The American people are waking up to the fact that, yes, the U.S. government does lie. They lie big. They lie grand. They lie spectacularly to get what they want. And they don't show any signs of stopping anytime soon. And they're trying as hard as they can to get World War III going for real on all of this stuff. So what are they going to do? Sink the Lusitania again? Blow up the USS Maine again? Torpedoes chasing the USS Maddox? They'll come up with something because they need to look like either Iran or Russia fired the first shot. We'll be right back after the news. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645. And Tom is still in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. You've probably heard by now, Harry Reid is going to retire at the end of his current term. Everybody's cheering and, bemoaning the fact that he's never been brought up on charges for all of his corruptions, especially that incident out there at the Bundy Ranch. But, hey, he's gone. Let's just be happy with that. Of course, there's a huge line of people ready to take his place who are just as corrupt, just as much money junkies and power freaks. And that is unfortunately the curse of political power. It attracts the very sort of people who should not be allowed to have it. And originally this country was designed to hold those kinds of people in check, but they are persistent, and they have subverted our nation and its government. And Thomas Jefferson himself, in his own writings, wrote that his new government, he didn't expect it to last more than 100 years before the accumulated corruptions and perversions forced the people to have another revolution. Jefferson really believed that periodic revolution was the best way for people to keep themselves free from oppressive government. All righty. Now, speaking of oppressive government, bizarre story out of Patriot Rising. Okay. Apparently, there are now some schools that need a signed permission slip for parents before children are allowed to eat Oreo cookies in school. Apparently, this has to do with the danger of double-stuffed Oreos. And they want to make sure it's okay with the parents. Frankly, I think those double-stuffed Oreo cookies are probably better for those kids than those Michelle Obama school lunches. Those things are horrible. But we got to get the future generation used to eating their Soylent Green. And that's where we're going. Now, up in Canada, this is a bizarre story. There is a veteran, Paul Franklin, who suffered the loss of both legs in military service. And apparently, every year, he has to fill out paperwork saying that, yes, he still does not have his legs to qualify for his disability benefits. Does the Canadian Military High Command think they might just grow back on their own? And apparently it's a huge amount of paperwork. He has to refile every single year. Amazing. Amazing. Now, you just heard the story on SRN about this police officer, and unfortunately this story was cut off. Basically, there was a confrontation where this officer took an Indian man and slammed him onto the ground hard enough to partially paralyze him permanently. Completely unjustified. I mean, the police are out of control in this country. And there is this story out of Ex-Republic TV about two police officers who were married, and they beat their own 3-month-old infant into a vegetative state. No chance of recovery. And Robert Jeffrey Taylor, 45 years old, worked for the York Police Department, was a corporal, and he was arrested, and his wife, Audrey Shuring, 36, was arrested as an accessory for not intervening. And if they're doing this to their own children, what's going on? Is it the Israeli training? Prescription antidepressants? Now, down in Georgia, which, as you know, already has a very foul reputation for police, there was a gentleman, 58-year-old Boyd Green, who kept calling the 911 for a welfare check on his mother because she was not responding to phone calls or messages, and the police ignored it, and finally turned out the woman had passed away. And Green, on the 911 call where they finally got through and said she had died, uttered a couple of questionable phrases, didn't even raise his voice. And he just lost his mother. And Georgia law prohibits the use of obscene language on a 911 call. So after the police ignored this guy's request to check on his mother, and she dies, they arrest and jail him for using obscene language to a 911 operator. It is bizarre. 6-year veteran foul-mouthed police chief indicted on 73 criminal charges. This is in Kentucky. And he was indicted on 1 count of abuse of a public trust over $10,000, 1 count of theft by unlawful taking, 1 count of theft by deception under $500, and 70 counts of criminal possession of a forged instrument. Now, one of my listeners sent me this very interesting document. It is a copy of the Principles of Police Conduct that was written out by Home Minister Robert Peel at the establishment of the Metropolitan London Police Force in 1829. This is what they thought the police should be in 1829. The primary function of the police is the prevention of both crime and disorder. The actions taken by the police are entirely dependent on approval by the people and their acceptance. The maintenance of the rights and dignity of citizens is of utmost importance, and the police are to garner voluntary assistance from the people in the maintenance of law and order. The use of physical force by the police will not help in getting cooperation. In fact, it will achieve the opposite. The police will earn the favor of the people by being a completely impartial force rather than pandering to popular opinions. Only when polite verbal communication with people fails to achieve the desired results of law and order should the police revert to the use of physical violence. In essence, the police and the public are the same. The former is just a paid extension of the latter to completely focus on securing the welfare of their kind. All actions taken by the police need to be focused on doing their prescribed duties without threatening the judiciary and its powers in any way. And the best one of all for the last. The real test for the police is not the method in which results are achieved, but the results themselves, which is the absence of crime and instability in society. How far the police have fallen from those noble ideas. By the way, somebody has started a website tracking police killings. We have it linked to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. 270 so far this year. Now, TSA has come out with their new checklist on how to spot potential terrorists. And it got leaked. And the guidelines for determining who gets an extra security screening, it's bogus. I mean, some are obvious, like appears to be in disguise. But apparently if your Adam's apple is bobbing too much, that's the sign you may be a terrorist. Arriving late means you might be a terrorist. Complaining too much about the security screening, guilty as charged on my part, means you might be a terrorist. It's starting to sound like a bad Jeff Foxworthy joke. If you're dressed out of style for the area, you might be a terrorist suspect. So, now, getting on to human-caused global warming. Right now, the Great Lakes ice cover is the third highest on record. The corporate media was trying to sell this idea that the Arctic ice is the lowest it's ever been. We've already established it's already thicker and larger than 2006, 2007, 2008, 2011. They're lying. They're just flat out lying to you to sell you this agenda. Okay, over in Kingston Peninsula, a Department of Transportation storage dome has collapsed under the weight of the accumulated snow on it. You know, snow, that stuff that back in 2000 they said was a thing of the past. And they're saying they were planning on replacing it next year anyway, so it's not that big a deal. Apparently overnight, 100 motorists were stranded on the wrong side of the bridge going to New Brunswick due to whiteout conditions. We'll have more about human-caused global warming when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we get back to global warming, I was watching the corporate media here, and I just saw a commercial for a non-surgical cheek implant chemical where apparently they stick a needle and pump up your cheeks so that they look more beautiful, with them telling you that fatter cheeks are the sign of beauty, which I think is rather arbitrary. And then they go down the list of all the possible side effects. Are you kidding? Anyway, now, getting on back to human-caused global warming. Obviously, we just had a real intense winter. Record snow, record cold, record ice. And along the Ohio River, some of that ice is finally starting to break up. And apparently, the ice is so intense coming down the river, it's pushing onto the shore, and it has pushed into a low-lying cemetery that has never before been touched by ice from the river. It's a Civil War cemetery, and some of these headstones dating from 1865 got knocked over. That's a lot of ice. Speaking of ice, down in Colombia and Ecuador, on the equator, they had a foot of hail come down. That's a lot of hail. Now, I do need to correct myself about the story we ran yesterday about Ted Cruz equating climate deniers to flat earthers. And the caller was right and I was wrong. And I went back. My original story I linked to was not written very well and very clear. And it turns out that Ted Cruz is questioning human-caused global warming. And he equates the global warming hysterics to the flat earthers. So I was wrong on that part of it. Still doesn't mean I'm going to support him for president, but we needed to correct that. But it's basically bringing up the fact that human-caused global warming may be a major issue going into the 2016 campaign. especially if Al Gore becomes the Democrats' contender for the White House as Hillary continues to fizzle and fade. And I think it would be a good thing. I think people need to finally stand up and realize this was just another government hoax to trick you out of your money and obedience, to get you to buy carbon credits, to get you to pay carbon taxes, and to let some environmental authority tell you how to live your life. And I don't agree with a lot of what the GOP is up to right now, especially the war agenda, but they're absolutely right. Human-caused global warming was a propaganda operation to convince you the world is in danger and can only be saved by you agreeing to live a simpler, more austere life. And, of course, give all your extra money over to the money junkies. And you need to remember, Al Gore, when he set up his carbon exchange, was assisted by Enron's Ken Lay. This whole thing is set up to do to the entire world with carbon what Enron did to California using electricity. Just rip huge profits out of the system. Now, California Democrat Barbara Lee is proposing a resolution in the House of Representatives that is based on the claim that women in the United States will eventually be forced into prostitution because of human-caused global warming. I have a list of everything that's been blamed on human-caused global warming. This is going to go onto that list, but it's ridiculous. Now, a lot of people have been very much up in arms over this sudden ending of the BBC series Top Gear, or at least the version hosted by Jeremy Clarkson, James May, and Richard Hammond. And the official story is this was all basically a single punch was thrown over the fact that after a particularly hard day of filming, there wasn't a hot meal for the crew. Now, that story really didn't make a lot of sense, and as it turns out, BBC's upper management have been kind of wanting to get rid of Jeremy Clarkson all along because they see him as politically incorrect. And BBC's management, they're very liberal, that political correctness, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. And what's really weird, and it's correctly being pointed out, the BBC got rid of Jeremy Clarkson the first opportunity they could, because he also does not support the idea of human-caused global warming. This is the same BBC management who, when they weren't announcing the collapse of World Trade Center Building 7 22 minutes before it actually happened, protected Jimmy Savile for decades upon decades of his molesting children. So basically, BBC is less tolerant of a climate skeptic than of a pedophile. Now, there's another article that came out in the Daily Mail that is excoriating BBC because of comments they have been making about how they don't care if Top Gear is off the air because, you know, the people who are paying those licensing fees, they'll watch whatever we put up there for them to watch. We're not going to lose any audience. The common people will always find something to watch. And the elitist arrogance is fully on display. And I think BBC is going to take a major clubbing on this because Top Gear was their top exported show around the world. They canceled the broadcast of already made episodes they were contracted to provide. Their lawsuits are going to be flying. And they burned their bridges in terms of getting Jeremy, James, and Richard back. They're already making plans on what they want to do. James May wants to become a teacher. Good for him. And this political correctness, we are in charge of the minds of Great Britain and the world, I think is going to come back to bite them on the rear end. Now, there's an article over in naturalblaze.com talking about the recent World Health Organization report that glyphosate is a probable human carcinogen. And, of course, Monsanto is out there screaming and wailing, and no, it's perfectly safe. We demand that you retract this. And then, of course, they had that huge embarrassment where somebody got this on video. A propagandist for Monsanto was out there telling a bunch of people that glyphosate is safe enough to drink, and somebody hands him a glass of Roundup, and he refuses to drink it, and he says, I'm not stupid. And that's gotten on video. That's going viral. And even the EPA, their toxicology branch ad hoc committee, classified glyphosate as a Class 3 carcinogen. So what we have had here is 30 years of Monsanto selling a carcinogenic chemical for use on our food, and it's now contaminated water and air. 75% of samples have some degree of glyphosate in it. And they've been fighting to keep this from the public eye. Remember that French study with the rats? And they literally got one of their own executives into this publication to get that study retracted. 30 years of selling a product that they knew to be carcinogenic, and it's coming to an end. Maybe. Monsanto's evil knows no ends. When we come back from this commercial, another development that's happening on the GMO front. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about Monsanto. We're talking about the growing awareness that glyphosate used in Roundup is a serious health hazard, and Monsanto's efforts to simply keep that hidden from you, the American people, because you're just there to give us money for our products. We know that the Roundup-ready crops have failed in that the pests have learned to adapt, have evolved to tolerate glyphosate. And so now these farmers are under these seed contracts. They have to go on buying the seeds, and they still have to douse their fields with ordinary pesticides because the Roundup doesn't work any longer. Now, following up on that, last Congress there was a bill introduced. It didn't go anywhere. Critics have named it the Dark Act for Deny Americans the Right to Know. And this bill grants to the Secretary of Health and Human Services the sole authority whether or not there will be GMO labeling in this country. And basically sets out limits saying that you can't put on your label free from GMO. And this has been reintroduced this session by Kansas Republican Representative Mike Pompeo. And it's there to basically, the federal government will overturn and invalidate the existing state laws in Vermont, Connecticut, and Maine that require GMO labeling. Now, just as they know that glyphosate is a problem, they have to know that GMOs are a problem. Because if they thought, honestly, seriously, that GMOs were good, first of all, they'd serve them in their own company cafeteria, which they don't. And they would say, contains more GMO than the other product over there. They'd sell it as a positive talking point. And they don't. And they're trying to basically buy the federal government, which is admittedly for sale, to tell the states that they may not mandate GMO labeling inside the sovereign states themselves. It's an attack not just on your health and your right to know what you're putting in your mouth. It's an attack on state sovereignty, state rights. The federal government is exceeding its authority in telling the states you may not require GMO labeling. By the way, bans on GMO labeling are a major part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Partnership. Major stumbling block because so many other countries around the world already mandate GMO labeling. They don't want this stuff. It's dangerous. Now, on Sunday, for those of you who have HBO, on Sunday, check your local listings. There is a documentary coming out called Going Clear, and it's about the Church of Scientology, which was started as a bet between Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard and fellow science fiction writer Robert Heinlein about how you could get rich just making up a brand new religion. And that's what L. Ron Hubbard did. He invented a new religion, Scientology. He's a science fiction writer, or he was. Then he got rich with Scientology and he quit writing. So anyway, Alex Gibney has done a documentary about Scientology, interviewing a lot of former members of the church about what's really going on in there. It is a cult. And the Church of Scientology is very powerful. They've got a lot of money, a lot of influence in Hollywood. When I was working in Hollywood, I kept bumping into these people. They're very scary. Right now, the Church of Scientology is worth about $3 billion. They have been banned in other countries. Germany banned them as an obvious cult years ago. And apparently Scientology has launched a propaganda campaign trying to demonize all the former Scientologists who appear in the documentary and say, well, they're kooks, they're crack, they're dangerous, they're wife abusers, they do all this terrible stuff. They even set up a non-profit organization with a very bland title promoting objectivity in religious discussion, which does nothing but attack going clear. So you might want to take a very good look at this documentary. It's called Going Clear. It's on HBO starting on Sunday, and it's continuing for several days afterwards. And it is time for people to start taking a look, because this is one of the most dangerous religious cults that have come along. They're not quite as dangerous as the Children of God that I had a more direct interaction with many years ago. But they are dangerous, and they have tremendous influence in Hollywood. That's how Battlefield Earth got made. Major Turkey film. So you definitely want to look at that one. Now, over in Indiana, speaking of sliding into a dark ages of religious rule, Indiana has passed what they call the Religious Objections Bill that allows any business to not serve people if it opposes their religious beliefs. They're basically, of course, this is not going to apply to Jews, but if a Muslim comes into your place of business, you can say, get on out of here. And primarily, the concern is that this will allow Christian organizations to openly discriminate against gay people. And it is. We're showing all the symptoms of a declining empire. Anyway. Speaking of religion, let's see. Former Christian brother jailed for abusing 20 boys at 6 Catholic schools over 14 years. And apparently, this is down in Australia. And apparently, one of the victims reported that George Pell, who was at the time the Archbishop of Sydney, was told this abuse was going on and refused to do anything about it. Now, Pell himself has come out and said that, I had no idea this was going on. And one of the victims has said, yeah, he did because we told him. All righty. Now, we've been talking over the last couple of months about these horrible stories of abuse of children and unwed mothers at these Irish facilities that were run by the church. There was this amazing movie, Dame Judi Dench played the lead role of one of the children who'd been born there and then sold to American parents in an adoption and grown up, tried to go back and find where she really came from. And there are all these facilities that have been found where they're finding the corpses of dead children just buried in abandoned wells. It's a horrible, horrible story. And it was a huge scandal. And Ireland was forced to undertake an investigation. So far, so good. We'll finally get some closure on this. But apparently under pressure from the church, I imagine they're getting phone calls saying, if you let this out, you will go to heck when you die. And now the government, the Irish government, is planning to pass a law that will seal this abuse report for 75 years. And obviously, 75 years from now, all the people that are affected by this will be dead and gone. All those who profited from it will be dead and gone. All of the people who want to know what happened to their families will be dead and gone. It almost completely nullifies having the investigation, which is the point. You come in, you say, don't worry, we'll investigate. We, the government, will investigate, whatever it is, Kennedy's assassination. And we've got all the evidence, and we're going to lock it up for 75 years until those who profited from whatever the crime was are comfortably dead and gone. And it's just something that happened so long ago, nobody gets upset. But obviously, this is another cover-up to protect the church. We've been seeing the same thing up in Canada with the residence school scandal that's been struggling to get out into the light. And the government keeps saying, no, you can't say anything bad about the church. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our Pauhana Friday broadcast here before we head into the weekend. Got a few stories to pick up on. And again, this idea of rising theocracy as a symptom of a descent into a new dark ages here. Over in Arizona, during a debate on a piece of gun legislation, Arizona State Senator Sylvia Allen came out saying that they should pass a bill mandating attendance at church. This is what the state legislature of Arizona is apparently dealing with right now. The idea that you will be required by law to attend a church. Now, common sense is going to tell you freedom of religion also has to include freedom from religion. Now, the Bible bangers like to scream that, well, atheism is just another religion because they just have different beliefs. And actually, no, technically, atheism is the absence of beliefs. Calling atheism a religion is like calling barefoot a type of shoe. But holding them to their words that atheism is just another religion, well, then that means we shouldn't be mandated going to a commercial church. And CNN's affiliate KTVK was reporting on this. Sylvia Allen is out there actually saying, no, we have to make people go to church. Because theocratic rule in the Muslim countries is bad. But theocratic rule in the Christian countries, that's good. It's ridiculous stuff here. All right, I want to talk about Fukushima. We were talking yesterday about they're trying to revive the idea of the ice wall. I don't think it's workable. Because, for one thing, they can't go underneath the ruins of that power plant. They can just go down around the outside, and down at the bottom of those cooling tubes, there is no mechanism to make sure the ice wall is solid and doesn't have gaps in it. And remember, a lot of that material coming out of the ruined reactors is hot enough to melt ice. It's just they're doing something to make it look like they're doing something. That's basically what it comes down to. Now, they're talking about the radioactivity that has leaked out from Fukushima. And one study has come to the conclusion that Fukushima has dropped 70,000 times more fallout and radiation on Japan than the nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And yesterday I was talking about if you go into Google Earth and you go over and you look at the remains of the reactor and you use that little time slider to go back to when it first happened, you can see how they're just building all these storage tanks because they don't know what to do with the water. None of these systems that were going to scrub and clean up the water have worked. And they've been dumping huge amounts of the radioactive water in the Pacific Ocean because they can't build the storage tanks fast enough. They're generating 300 tons of highly radioactive water every single day. And it's full of plutonium isotopes, 239, 240, 242. And plutonium accumulates in the human body. Remember, it's not the exposure to radiation that's the issue. It is contamination with an actual particle that embeds itself in your body and goes on radiating you from inside. And these plutonium isotopes have very long half-lives, so your total body burden is accumulating. This is history's worst nuclear disaster, and they don't know what to do about it. And it happened because corners were cut on the safety systems there. And that's underscored by the power station at Onagawa, which was built to higher standards and survived. I had a listener write into me yesterday and say, if you look at the photos of Fukushima, those diesel emergency generators were down in a pit. So, of course, they were going to flood out when the tsunami hit. Ultimately, I think these technologies can be run safely, but you cannot let the money junkies make the safety decisions. nor can you allow the money junkies to buy a government's blindness to those safety decisions. When you're talking about the ultimate cost of a disaster, whether it's Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, Fukushima, the epicite gene in that corn, the money junkies like to look at it, well, cost-benefit. Well, it's going to cost us this much, and it's probably not going to be of any benefit at all. Well, you need to look at it. What happens if there is a disaster? What is it going to cost the world? And, of course, the attitude from them is, oh, we're not going to pay that cost. That'll be borne by the taxpayers. And, the survivors, they'll have to deal with that. I want my bonus check now. And that's always a recipe for disaster. Somebody cutting a corner somewhere. You look at any of the major disasters that we have witnessed, and there's always a cascade of events going back to somebody saying, we really don't need this safety system. We only need one O-ring on the SRBs on Challenger. We don't need to spend the money to send along an EVA suit and the robotic arm on Columbia. So forth and so on. Another story about Monsanto, RINF.com. Apparently, Monsanto has finally had to pay the bill for hundreds of uncontrolled toxic chemical releases from its Idaho phosphate plant between 2006 and 2009. They got out of trouble by paying a mere $600,000 to the U.S. government. The U.S. government says, that's fine, you're forgiven. I grant you absolution, Monsanto. Go forth and sin no more. Story just came out over on cranescleveland.com. Wall Street bankers are talking about a symbolic protest against Congress by withholding campaign donations to Democrats who have been championing the idea that maybe some of these too big to fail, too big to jail financial institutions need to be broken up. And apparently representatives from Citigroup, J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and Bank of America are organizing to basically persuade Democrats to back off this agenda by simply saying, you will get no money from us for your next campaign. And that, of course, is a reminder of why. When this country was first set up, there were limits on campaign donations, so that a campaign war chest for a candidate was a true reflection of their grassroots support and not merely being for sale to the highest bidder. This entire story tells us what's gone wrong with Wall Street and Washington, D.C. as they take off the limits of corporate spending and donations on candidates. It basically makes Congress for sale to the highest bidder, and Wall Street's got all the money. So maybe as a guideline going into 2016, just as an automatic rule of thumb, vote for the person with the least amount of campaign money, because they are the most likely to be concerned with ordinary Americans. If you go to somebody with, millions and billions in campaign money to spend, like Hillary Clinton, she's going to be working for those people who gave her that money. Many of them apparently foreign leaders to that foundation. Got to vote for the candidate with the least amount of money because they have sold out the least. They haven't sold their soul to Wall Street or Israel or the military-industrial complex or the security-industrial complex. Anyway. Another article over here at Investment Watch blog, and it's talking about this seeming epidemic sweeping the world of glitches, technical problems that are preventing people from getting their own money out of their bank account at the ATM machines. And they're focusing on a situation in Ulster Bank of Ireland where customers were locked out of their accounts, supposedly by a glitch. Now, I think these banks are all hitting cash flow problems, and they solve it by locking up their customers' accounts until they can sort out the cash flow, and then you can have your money now, we're done with it. Good reason to keep your own money at home under your own control. All right, there's the music. Time for head on out into the weekend, and this weekend I would like to remind you all, please share with your friends, family, co-workers, social media, Genesis Communication, and whatreallyhappened.com. We need to reach more people to try and stop this rush into World War III. We need your support to keep going because the big liars are getting the big bucks, and we're running on spare change over here. We'll be back Monday. Aloha, America.